And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Josie Thomson, near-death experiencer who has a deep-rooted expertise in neuroscience, energy healing, personal growth, and more, which we will talk about today. Josie, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Well, Josie, you've had 2 NDEs. I figured we could just go through them chronologically. So, would you like to start on the day the first one happened, or do you need a little backstory?
Let me give you a bit of backstory. So, the first occasion in 2009, actually, no, that's the second one. So, let's go to the first one. So, it's 1991. I'm 24 years old. I was super fit, didn't drink, didn't smoke, super healthy. And all of a sudden, I had this discomfort in my neck. So I went to the doctor. I'd ignored it for several weeks, but it got to a point where I couldn't swallow. So I thought, I should get it checked out. So I went to the doctor. He poked around. He said, look, I think it's glandular fever, but let's check. So he did an ultrasound, and thankfully he did, because he found that there was actually a tumor. And he said, look, we need to remove it. Because you're young and fit, we're not going to bother about a biopsy. So let's just go ahead and book you into hospital and we'll take it out and you'll be going home within 24 hours. Had the surgery. And that evening, it got to nearly midnight and the doctor hadn't come to see me. And my then husband was sitting beside me. And I remember having a conversation with him and I said, I've got a feeling it could be cancer. And this is 1991. And that word was hardly ever used. I had a distant relative who had had breast cancer several years before that, but it wasn't a common occurrence within community. And being so young, it was the least thing that any of us had expected. So anyway, just on midnight, my doctor walks in the room, and this is a doctor that had known me a very long time. And you can tell that he'd been emotional. His eyes are kind of still glassy. And I'm thinking, what's going on, And he said, Josie, I don't know how to tell you this. He said, it's cancer. It's malignant. It's stage 3. We need to do another surgery because I only took out half the thyroid. It will be spreading now. And it felt really surreal. My husband broke down. I looked at him and I just nodded my head. I couldn't talk. And I was just kind of taking it in, not really appreciating what it meant. And he said, so do you understand what I said? And I'm nodding. And he said, do you know what malignant means? I nodded. And he said, so when can we do the second surgery? And all of a sudden, this voice rose out of me without me even thinking. And it said, if you don't do this first thing tomorrow morning, I am never going to let you touch me again. And with that, he left the room and he organized that surgery for 8 o'clock the next morning. I knew I didn't need time to think about it. When my husband left that night, he stood at the door and he looked at me, and that was the last time I saw him. Something in me said, I know he's not coming back. And I knew that this was so big for 24-year-old people to be dealing with. And he had his own fear. I had a fear which was about living, and his was losing me. And so it was easier to run than to hold space for the inevitable that we thought. Because the doctor had given us, I said to him, well, what's the prognosis? He said, well, if we don't do anything, you've got 6 months. And I looked at him and I said, how do you know that for sure? And I didn't get a sufficient enough answer. And so because I'm a very analytical person, I kind of looked at that and I went, I'm going to take the gap in the game there. I don't buy that answer. So instead of going into, I don't want to die, there was this voice inside me that said, I'm going to fight to live, right? Which is a completely different orientation. And I later learned through neuroscience the difference that actually makes. But having had the surgery, the second surgery the next day, I lost a lot of blood. So I was in intensive care. I was there for over 2 weeks. And during that time, I flatlined twice. And both times I experienced NDEs. And both times what happened was that an aspect of my awareness rose out of my body and was floating up above on the ceiling, looking down at my physical body. And I was perfectly aware that I was there and I was there at the same time. And it didn't worry me. Like, that was a kind of surreal, blissful, serene feeling, just floating there, no judgment, no reaction, just observing what was going on, being aware that I was here and there. And I was just looking, and then all of a sudden I saw the line on the screen go flat, and I saw the nurses running in and reviving me. And whilst I was there floating, looking down at my body, I heard this very loud male voice say to me from the left, "It's not your time yet." And with that, I went straight back into body. And then it happened again the next day, exactly the same thing, flat line, rose up, looked at my body. The voice again said, "It's not your time yet." And I went straight back into my body. And over those 2 weeks, the only people that were allowed to visit me were my immediate family and two of my closest friends. And I could tell you every conversation that was had in the room, even though I was totally unconscious, where everyone was seated in the room, who was saying what, who was doing what, and my eyes were totally shut. And this body was totally shut down and recovering. It was extraordinary. So then I come out of the hospital. How do you make sense of that? I'd never heard of an NDE. I had no clue about that. I thought if I dare talk about that, people are going to think I'm a loony, or it must have been the drugs. But I knew what I'd seen and felt and heard, but I had no clue as to how to make sense of any of that. So welcome to a brand new world, the world of the seeker.
Do you have any idea who the male voice was?
I do now. At the time, I had no idea. And at the time, I had been raised a Roman Catholic. So I was more religious than spiritual. But this was the pivot point of my life. This cancer journey, the first cancer journey, gave me permission to find my voice. That's what this was all about. You know, stop suppressing, start expressing. So in 2009, so I'm going to jump forward towards my second NDE. I was diagnosed with a brain tumor on Christmas Eve. And I thought to myself, wow, I do not want to tell my family about this until after New Year, because let's get through the festivities. And, you know, this was huge because by this time I had remarried and I had two little kids. And so it wasn't just me to think about, it was children as well. And so it was a different battle this time. There was a sense of fear around this because it was unexpected. There were some symptoms. I started getting tingling on the side of my face, which I ignored. And then I started getting headaches, which I never get. And I thought, I should get this checked out. And then that's the diagnosis on Christmas Eve. So that was a really tough festive season to get through because everyone could tell there was something wrong. I was suppressing, you know, and trying to put on this fake smile that everything was okay. But, you know, Mum knew something was up, but I wasn't prepared to say anything till after New Year. And anyway, I told one of my really close friends, and she said to me, "You have to go and see this psychic healer in Sydney. But I'm just warning you, she's got a 3-year wait. But if there's any chance, you need to go and see her before you have your surgery." And my surgery was booked for the 26th of January. So I had about just over 3 weeks. So I rang her and I said, "Hey, I've been given your number. Is there any chance I can see you within the next 3 weeks?" And she started laughing. She said, "Look, I'm booked out for 3 years." But then she said, "Oh, hang on a minute. I've got a booking available on the, I think it was the 24th of January. My surgery is on the 26th. And that's perfect. I'm flying down. So I flew down to Sydney, not having any clue about who this woman was or what she was going to do, but something in me said, you need to go and have this conversation. So I went in there, and I had never been in the presence of someone who channeled other entities within their physical form. And so she kind of described it to me. She said, look, different voices are going to come out of my body, depending on who it is that wants to connect and talk with you. Do not be alarmed. If at any point you want me to stop, you just say stop, because I'm still in the room. I still can see what's going on, but I'm allowing them to talk through my body to you. She said, I don't know who's going to come through, but it won't be scary, and it's always for your highest good. I said, okay. So she did this thing with her neck, and then all of a sudden this Asian voice started coming out of her mouth, and she kind of, shoulders came down, and she started talking to me in this really thick Asian accent. And this voice said, look, in 2 days' time, you're going to be given some options for treatments, and the only ones you're to consider is this, 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 and this. And I'm like, what's going on? I gave her no story. I gave her nothing about who I am or what's going on in my life. Nothing. How could she possibly know? So I just listened really carefully to who this doctor was that was talking to me. And he ended up being the doctor who invented Reiki. Can't remember his name right now.
Wow.
And I just completed my second level of Reiki. And so, he encouraged me to give Reiki to myself and what have you. And that was really helpful. And then she popped in and she said, are you okay? There's someone else here that wants to talk. He's being very insistent. I'm like, okay. So she disappeared again. And then all of a sudden her body like rose like this in the chair. And this big booming voice started coming out. And it said, in 2 days' time, you'll be given a choice and you must decide. And it was like really precise. And it's one of those voices that you don't mess with. It was the same voice that spoke to me in 1991. This was January 2010, and I recognized the voice. And all the hair on my body stood up, and I was holding onto the chair, like with my fingernails. And I'm like scared. And I'm going, who are you? And there was this pause. And then the answer came. And he said, I am Archangel Gabriel. And I just burst into tears. And like even now, talking about it, I felt like I was in the presence of unconditional love, and I was being held. So the rest of that conversation went, he said, look, in 2 days' time, you'll be given the choice. You can either come back home because you belong to my choir. Alternatively, your work starts in earnest, but you must decide. And I'm like, I just took a breath and I went, okay. And that's the whole free will thing, right? So then he left, and then she said, and she came back, she said, are you okay? She could see that I was like a little kind of rattled. And then she said, there's one more. I said, okay. And this whole session took like 4 hours. And then all of a sudden, like her body became really little. And this little child's voice came out of her body. And it said, do you know who I am? And I said, no, I have no clue who you are. And she says, I'm a little cherub angel. I said, okay. And she said, do you know how you love children? I said, yeah, I do. I really love children. She said, no, you really, really, really love children. I said, yeah, I do. She said, do you know why? I said, no, I don't. And she said, because when you're up here, you look after us. You make us laugh and you play with us, and a lot of us have been hurt, and you remind us about how to be happy and joyful. And I just felt my heart explode, because that's the joy I feel when I'm around children. And she said, I've got something for you. And then all of a sudden, this body started going through this woman's office, throwing things all over the office. And I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get in trouble here. You know, it's like a little kid looking for something. And she's throwing things out everywhere. And then she goes, I found it, I found it. And she comes running back like a child. And she hands me this layered shell. And you know how you see those layered shells on the beach and they've been chipped, and when you touch them, they're powdery? She handed me one of these shells. And she said, see this? She said, this is your bones. Your bones are very sick and we're going to make them better. And I went, okay. So she said, take this to the, she couldn't say hospital. She said, take this to the hospital. And she said, and tell the doctor that you have to hold it because we're going to make you all better. And I'm like, okay. So anyway, this little child left and I was left with this channeled. This is before my NDE, right? So then when I go to the hospital to have my brain tumor surgery the next day, I take this shell with me, still not knowing whether I would decide to stay or go, because apparently I was going to be given the choice. And I said to the anaesthetist and the surgeon, can you strap this shell, it's a flat shell, can you strap this to my palm? And they looked at me and they looked at the shell. They wanted to make sure there was no metals in it. I said, yeah, that should be okay. They didn't question me. They didn't think I was a lunatic. They just got some tape and they strapped it to my hand. And one of the other things that Archangel Gabriel said to me, when you go under, make sure you put your hands out like this because we're going to be holding your hands. So I remembered that. And so I had the shell strapped here and I had this one with all these different things plugged in. My head had a whole bunch of stuff in it. And I lay down, hands, palms up, and the anaesthetist put me out. And still, I had no clue which way I was going to go. And in preparation for that, I bought puppies for the dogs just in case I died. I left letters for the kids. I gave away all my jewelry to friends and family, preparing as if I was going to leave. And then several hours later, I don't know what time it was, I opened my eyes and everything was hazy and I had to figure out, am I still alive? And I think I was alive because, you know, I started seeing the ICU unit again. And the doctor came over a few hours later and he checked in on me. He said, you're going to be okay. And I'm like, oh, wow, you know, I'm still alive. I must have decided, but I couldn't talk. So for 6 months, I couldn't walk or talk after that surgery. And, you know, when I tried to walk, like my body, the signals, I could hear everything in my head, but my body wasn't responding. And this was like a lesson to just shut out all of that noise and to tune in and to start listening to my body and to now start. By now, I have finished my master's studies in neuroscience. So now I knew the potentials of the brain, the science potentials of the brain, and I knew about neuroplasticity. So when the doctor looked at me and said, you know, unfortunately, you've sustained some damage, you probably won't walk or talk properly again. Lucky I couldn't talk because what I would have wanted to say wasn't going to be pleasant, but I could feel my Taurian horns coming out of my head. And the Taurian in me says, you know what, if you tell me what I can't do, I'm going to show you how I can. So there was this willfulness in me, knowing that I had all the knowledge I needed to be able to heal myself back. 6 months later, I walked into my surgeon's office for my follow-up appointment. And he looked at me and he said, what have you been doing? And I told him, I said, I've been meditating, I've been rehearsing. I told him all this stuff that, you know, that I'd learned through the studies to remember, help my body remember, to recall its faculties and functions. It was hard, but I did it. And he just looked at me and said, whatever you've done, just keep doing it. And I did Reiki and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Things he didn't really want to know about. And then he said, yeah, I've got a question for you. I said, okay. He said, when we put you under, you said something, and I made sure we wrote it down, and I'm curious about what it meant. And I said, what did I say? And he said, you said, I've decided. And I knew exactly what it meant now, but I didn't know I'd even said those words when they put me under. Yeah. So that was a whole other journey. So then fast forward to last year, 2023, I have a chronic dysfunction of my nervous system, which is a result of pushing myself past burnout for way too long, way too many years as a single mom, and, you know, other mouths to feed and our house to pay off. And as a consequence, I now have this nervous system dysfunction that creates a lot of pain, you know, neuropathic pain down the right side of my body. And so my neurologist suggested I go into hospital and have some ketamine treatment. And so I'd had one round of ketamine treatment. It was very successful, so that was fine. So then 6 months later, I needed to go in again because all of the pain returned. And having had it the first time, I didn't have trepidation or fear around it. I thought it's going to be okay. But this time, this was past COVID, and hospital staffing was different. Hospital protocols were different. I probably won't say too much more about that, but basically what happened was that the ketamine levels were not being monitored sufficiently. So my liver was almost totally destroyed. And as a consequence of that, my body went into toxic shock. As a consequence of that, I died. So I happened to have a girlfriend there with me that evening, and she could see I was just trembling and I was going into toxic shock. I'd had the doctors and nurses in, and they were ignoring me because it was a weekend and my proper pain doctor wasn't due to come in until Monday morning. And whatever reason, they didn't want to call her. But my girlfriend who works at the hospital saw my body, saw what was happening to me, called out to have one of those foil blankets delivered to me immediately to try to get my temperature up. And then she rang my core community of spiritual friends who would want to be there if something like this was going to happen. And so there was 5 of them that raced to the hospital within an hour. And like I was in this unconscious state, wrapped in this foil, and I could see them all in the room gathering, and I could feel something was going to happen, but I didn't know what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, in my unconscious state, I saw this beautiful golden grid rising up out of my body. It was like a gold that I've never seen before. And at the same time, I became aware of this white torus field that was coming down from the right corner of the room towards me, drawing this golden grid out of my body. And I just went, wait, hang on, am I dying? Like I remember asking this question, and I'm like, I'm dying. No, not yet. I've got to say goodbye. So I was a part of my awareness was able to leave the room in an instant, go and find my father in the garden, went and found my mother in the kitchen, went and found my brother in his car, went and found my sister in her house, went and found my son and my daughter in their homes. And then my awareness came back into the room. I'm still aware of this this matrix sitting up here, and this torus field drawing it up, and I'm going, okay, I'm ready now. And I could see, this was it. I was about to leave, and I was curious about this matrix I'd never seen before. And then all of a sudden, this almighty voice rose up and out of my body and said, not so fast. And I'm like, okay. It was what there was a different voice. It was a female voice. It was a strong, assertive voice. And the voice said to me, you've pushed me, you've abused me, you've neglected me, you've exhausted me. And it just went on and on and on. And as I was hearing this, I could feel tears coming down my face. And the people in the room could see this lifeless body in the bed with tears rolling down my face, right? And I'm just in shock listening to this voice going, yeah, that's true. And the voice then said, you're not going to decide when to go. It's me that's going to decide. When I stop breathing, then you're out. And then I thought, oh, wow, that was the voice of my body. And it roared really loud at me. And I have taken this body for granted, and I have neglected this body, and I have exhausted and pushed her beyond her limits. No wonder I was now in this predicament. And then all of a sudden I said, you're right, I am so sorry. It was like I was crying and begging forgiveness from my own body. And I could feel this softening happening in my body. And apparently I was unconscious for about 5 hours, and these people held space for me because they wanted to, well, 2 of them saw what I was seeing because they're psychic. But the others just went, oh God, she's dying. Lucky we're here for her. And then I opened my eyes and I was just covered in sweat. And I looked at all 5 of them and I couldn't say anything at all. I didn't know what to say. And then when I did have the awareness of being able to say anything, I just said, I need a shower. And they just burst into laughter. And I just went and sat under a cold shower on the ground and just had to get this stuff off me, but my body was still yelling at me. My liver was screaming and flaring because they still had the ketamine connected to me. They wouldn't take it off. And so I went back into bed. I thanked them all for being in there and holding space. And I asked them to return the next day because I was pretty certain I was going to die the next day. So I spent the next 12 hours through the night just writing letters to everybody. I wrote to my family and a couple of really close friends and instructions and all of that, just tidying up my affairs. I rang my children and they both came and saw me immediately, and I got to say goodbye to my children, and that was heart-wrenching. That was like, you may as well just pull the heart out of my body right now. It was that excruciating, especially with my son. And we held each other. He didn't want to leave. And I said, you can't stay here all night. It's okay. I'll be okay. You'll be okay. And then my 2 closest friends returned and held my hand, and I lay down and I could feel it again happening. And so the golden matrix came up and out. The white torus field came into the room, and I observed all of this happening again, and they were holding my hands. And then all of a sudden my body just went, and it just evaporated, and I opened my eyes and I went, I'm not going to die tonight. And my friends just looked at me and they said, good. It was almost like there was this decision, deciding to be here now and to do the work I need to do. And so there's my NDEs.
Have you ever thought about why you saw yourself as a golden grid and what that really means?
So what I realize now that's the matrix of our soul. So what I've learned since then is that, I used to use the word spirit and soul interchangeably, but what I've realized is that spirit is our essence, soul is our energy force, right? It's our blueprint that we've come here to express, to remember, and to share. And so they're different. And so that template that was coming out of me was my soul leaving my physical body to be returned to where we all come from.
It's interesting because your awareness was outside of your body. I guess you could call it your consciousness was watching some kind of energetic imprint or DNA imprint or something leaving your body. It's kind of like you and your soul were separate.
Well, who are you? Like, who am I? How do you describe yourself? Like, I believe we are spiritual beings in physical form. And so what does that mean? You know, we're not just this flesh and blood. What is it that gives us life force energy? It's energy. What is that energy? That's the soul. You know, and every soul is unique. And behind the soul is the spirit from where we came that never left, that never ever left us, that we forget because we can't see it. We can't feel it. Some people can sense it. But whenever we want support or help, it's there because it's here. It's we're all of it. And I never really appreciated before the words that I grew up with, like the house of God, you know, the temple, your body is a temple, all of this. These were words to me. I hadn't had an embodied appreciation for what that meant. What I realized is that God, the God of your heart, it lives within you. You are that energy. You are the creator of your reality. And your imprint, your soul template that you came here to remember and express and manifest in the world is unique to you. All of us have one of these templates, and every one of them are wired completely differently because no one's had your experiences. No one's walked one day of life in your shoes. And that's the uniqueness. And so what I've learned is that my healing is my gift to the world. That when I heal, I can actually now share that story and share what I did to help myself in the hope that other people can also do that for themselves, that it is possible, that we are all walking miracles and we are all creators.
Now that you've witnessed your body speaking, do you think that mind chatter is also your body speaking, or is it still our own consciousness?
No, you know, there's an author I really love. Her name's Sonia Choquette, and she shares this story about that chatter brain that has you second guess yourself and doubt yourself and stop you from taking risks and chances and says things like, who do you think you are? You know, that's like a barking dog, right? It's part of our consciousness, but it's not who we are. It's just, you know, it's just an aspect of self that's kind of trying to keep us in comfort zone, to keep us safe, you know. And with a barking dog, you just go, what do you say to a barking dog? You generally say, shut up, dog. And so that's what we need to do when we hear that little voice that's just keeping us small. It's like, shut up. And so my dog is a German Shepherd and I call him Rex. And so every time I hear that little voice coming up, I go, shut up, Rex. And what I do instead is I connect in with the energy of my soul. And so now I've got a picture of what that soul looks like, and I've given that a name. And for me to connect with that, all I have to do is remember all the things that I love. Like I love the sunshine, I love the beach, I love my children, I love kookaburras, I love trees, I love flowers, I love music, I love dancing. And that gives me a resonance and a feeling in my body that connects me straight in with that expansion of my heart. And I call that energy shiny, right? And so whenever I need guidance on anything, the first one there usually is Rex. And I go, shut up, Rex. I want to hear what Shiny's got to say. And it's a completely different way of leading and living my life.
When you died the second time and you went out and visited all your family because you thought you were not coming back, did you ever later verify that you saw them? And if so, what did they think about it?
Oh, yes. I asked them where they were. Were you in the garden at this time, Dad? Were you in the kitchen at this time, Mum? Were you driving, Jason? You know, Maria, were you at home? My sister was the only one that knew because she got a spidey sense. She said, I knew something was going on. I just had this feeling something was going on with you. I did not tell my mum and dad and my brother. My children knew I was in hospital, and my son I've always put on a very brave, strong face. But he realized that this was different, that somehow, you know, that fierce confidence that I generally have, which is not fake, it's actually quite real. Like, I know I'm going to be okay. I know I'm going to heal this condition. I have no idea how, but I'm tuning into my body in a way that I've never tuned in before. And I'm doing life completely differently than I ever have before. So to me, it's inevitable.
Earlier when you were speaking, I thought, oh, she has a fighter personality. And then in less than a minute, you mentioned it as well, that you had one. And then you said something to do with neuroscience. And you're going to speak about it later. So can you follow up with that?
Sure. So one of the things that I learned in neuroscience is this thing called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is our capacity to rewire the brain. And what science has proven is that we can learn things up until the day we die, right? The way that the brain works is that when you establish a pattern of behavior, it becomes a habit. And over time, these habits become unconscious. And at some point in time, you do a bit of a stock take and say, am I living the life I really want to live? What are the behaviors that support me living the life I want to live? And what are the behaviors that I've been doing unconsciously that no longer serve me, right? And when you have a wake-up call like that, or something that happens that changes the whole landscape of your reality, you have to do a bit of a stock take in terms of what thoughts, words, actions are in alignment and congruence with how and who I want to be. So for me, when the doctor said, you probably won't be able to walk or talk properly again, I knew in my heart and soul, having learned what I have about neuroscience, that I could retrain those circuits back to be able to walk and talk again. And there was a study I remember looking at when I was doing the studies that had two groups of people, and they were going to teach them piano. And they gave one group a physical piano, and they rehearsed with their fingers every single day. Then they had another group where they didn't have physical pianos. They were given an instruction where they had to imagine using fingers on keys in a particular sequence. So they didn't actually get to put their fingers on a piano at all. And then I think it was 3 weeks later, and they had to do this every day for a period of time. Then 3 weeks later, when they tested the two groups, the results were pretty much the same. So what they were able to conclude is that we have what's called imaginal cells in the brain. If you can imagine something, the same circuits get fired up as if you're actually doing those things. This is really extraordinary. You know, and this is why I get really worried about kids playing some of these really violent online games, because their prefrontal cortex, which is the rational brain that thinks about consequence, is not fully developed until our mid to late 20s. And so when they're performing violent acts on virtual reality, their brain doesn't know it's virtual. It's pretty scary stuff. But what I did is I used those imaginal cells every day. I would go outside. My mum would help me out there. I'd sit on the grass. I'd close my eyes and I would imagine seeing every single part of my body responding to the instruction to walk, noticing how my foot would lift itself and then the knee would bend and then I'd plant it down, noticing how my hand would respond, noticing that I could get the words out without stuttering, that I could think clearly. And so it was terribly frustrating, and it took a lot of persistence and patience, but I did it. And I also mentioned earlier that, you know, when it comes to fear, there's two types of fear that we can have, or motivation. You can fight for something or you can fight against something, and it's very, very different. So I could either fight against death, I don't want to die, or I can fight for life. I want to live. And they're very different outcomes. They sound the same. If I say I don't want to die, doesn't that mean I want to live? Of course it does. But I'm not focusing on living. I'm focusing on not dying. And that's a whole different chemistry that occurs in the body. When you focus on what you don't want, you draw to you the conditions to attract the very thing you don't want, because you've got the cortisol going on, you've got the anxiety going on. You don't have the conditions for healing in your body. You have to, as quickly as possible, decide what you want. And if you want to die, die a peaceful death. Make peace with who you need to make peace with. Make peace with yourself, so that you can actually die with grace and with peace. So it doesn't have to be so bitter and difficult and hurtful.
That's great advice. Do you have any other tips that you've picked up from neuroscience that you can share with us?
Look, I think if people can get into the habit of just realizing that oftentimes if I ask you what you actually want, you'll probably start telling me what you don't want. And that's automatic. We are born with knowing what we don't want because our brain is wired for safety. Our brain is wired to be on the lookout for things that might endanger us physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. So we know that we don't want to be rejected. We know that we don't want to be hurt. We don't want to be ridiculed. We don't want to fail. We know all this stuff. It's so deeply ingrained. But to actually know what you want takes effort because you have to refocus away from what you don't want and start looking forward to what you actually want. It's a completely different focus. When you focus on what you don't want, you're doing this. You're focusing on, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that. If I ask you what you do want, all of a sudden you start looking forward towards what you really want. And that's where you've got to be. So when you're starting to look at where you want to go, what you want, everything changes. The chemistry in your body changes. The part of the brain that focuses changes. You're not focusing with your limbic system, which gets you into that fight, flight, freeze mode. You're actually focusing forward with the prefrontal cortex, and you've got so many more resources available to you that resource and enable you to take an action.
If I go back to your first NDE,
Okay.
you were talking about the cherubs,
Yeah.
and you would play with them, and you mentioned they were hurt.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I don't know. Like that was the narrative. The narrative was that their souls had experienced some kind of traumas. And when they ascended into their home space, I brought them into a space of safety and nurturing and joy. And so their souls were restored, repaired, enlivened.
I guess nobody really knows exactly what angels are until they're on the other side. And I was under the assumption that since they were angels, perhaps they were always there. So I was wondering, how did they get hurt?
I think it's, for me, my understanding is that when we come down here with a soul template with what we're meant to be doing, this is the grid, right? But even though we have that grid, we may not actually realize it because we do have free will and free won't, right? And that there are things that happen in the course of our physical lifetime that create hurt or harm. And that can create a bit of a chink in the template. That's the only way I can kind of see it. And then it's our work to transcend and evolve and heal. And if we don't get to do that, then that work gets done when we leave this physical world. In that next dimension, it gets cleared out.
After either one of your NDEs, did you get any new abilities that could be considered psychic?
I think I've always been connected to Gabriel. I didn't realize it. When I was little, I used to always say, my Archangel's sitting beside me, you're not allowed to sit there. So I'd get the tram or I'd be sitting down for a meal and I'd say, sorry, my angel's sitting there. And I would say this all the time. And then, of course, the adult world starts interfering and says, don't be so stupid, I'm sitting there. And it gets taken off us. Like, I think we're born totally connected to all of that. And then the outside world starts affecting us, and we get dismissed for those nuances, if you like, and then we let them go and we forget them. And so since then, especially the last one, I have had this heightened connection with this template, with the soul and spirit. And I find now that if I sit down to write, the things that come out in the writing, it doesn't feel like this me. It's a bigger me that's coming in with wisdom that I know, and I don't know how I know. And I think we all have that, but it's not like I can't see other entities. I sense energy, and I'm acutely aware of what's going on in my body in a way that I have never been before since that last one.
I didn't mention it in the beginning, but you are also an author.
Yes.
What's the title of your book and what's it about?
Okay, well, I've got 2 books at the moment, but I've got 4 in draft, and these are the ones that people will want to read.
Wow.
The one that I've got 2, one's a little book. It's a little book of inspirations, which is just some of my musings over the years, and it's meant to be used as a book where you just hold it in your hands, think about what's some guidance I need today, and you open it up and you'll get what you need for the day. And that's called Enliven You. And then I co-authored a book with a world famous leading neuroscientist and specialist in obsessive compulsive disorder. His name is Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, and also a very well-known management consultant. He used to be the editor of a strategy and business magazine in New York, Art Kleiner. And the 3 of us wrote a book called The Wise Advocate, the inner voice of strategic leadership. And this is all about connecting with that voice within, right? But we're using terminology that's more accessible and acceptable by predominantly the business community, because that's where we really need them to connect with that voice. So the first 3 chapters are pretty heavy in terms of the neuroscience to describe that everything that we're talking about in the book is founded on concrete neuroscience. And then we go into really practical ways for people to be able to actually hear that inner voice and to learn to trust and to distinguish between, you know, the chatter versus the real, and how do you make the right decisions for you in any given time, knowing that the voice is always going to give you the, you know, clear guidance, always has your back and always has your best interest at heart in the long run.
That's great that you are involved in 3 books. I mean, just one is a great accomplishment, so good for you. Are you still in communication with Archangel Gabriel?
Yes, all the time. All the time. I meditate and I journal every day. Yeah. And I talk to him. I talk to him like he's right here with me right now.
All right.
Doesn't feel like a him.
It doesn't feel like a him?
No, it doesn't have a sex. It feels feminine and male, like androgynous. It's beautiful.
Josie, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that? And if so, how do they contact you?
Well, the best way is just my website, Josie Thomson, THOMSON.com. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn as well. And I've got a free monthly blog and newsletter that I put out, which is filled with lots of things. So if you get on that newsletter, you'll see what I'm up to, because this year is a big pivot year for me. I'm working on 4 books at the moment, and there'll be something new coming. So I'm really excited about it. I can't tell you about it right now because the details haven't all come through yet, but they're coming. And so I'd love to share it with you people.
You can't even give us a hint?
Fire.
Fire.
Fire. Transmutation, dissolving all aspects of you that are not serving your higher purpose and your higher calling. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you'll be willing to come back and we can talk about it.
Absolutely.
All right, well, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
So what I'd say is pain in life is inevitable. That's how we learn and grow. Suffering is optional. We do that to ourselves. Growth is intentional. You've got to choose it. So it's not what happens to you that defines you. It's how you respond that counts.
Josie, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
You're welcome.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.